history class. I got breaking news. Breaking news today. Okay? We actually have something we can talk about besides the coronavirus. I've got an election update for you today. Alright, there is actually still an election going on. I don't know if anybody even remembers that, but yeah, we're still in the process of figuring out who our next president is going to be. That's still going on. So just looked on the news, and I just got this incredible privilege, since there's nobody else here to do it instead of me. I guess I could get Mr. Burkholder to do it, but none of you guys here to take this great, wonderful, fun activity away from me. I got to take down Bernard Sanders. He is no longer running for president. Bernie Sanders. Oh, sorry, Hans. Sorry about that. If you want to cut him out, we will fix it up. And you can pick him up today. Today's drop-off day, and you can come pick him up and cut him out if you want. Also, I looked it up, and I thought Tulsi Gabbard was still in the race. She's not. She gone. She dropped out in March, actually. So Tulsi Gabbard is gone as well. So Hans, you want to cut that picture out? There you go. Anyway. So we are down to two guys, so let me just pan over there. Sorry about the jerkiness. We are down to, as Trump calls him, Crazy Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, who is probably crazier than Joe Biden. But anyway, those are the two guys left in the race. So we get a showdown between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which should be very interesting. The debates will be very interesting. Expect them to be lively. Expect them to be entertaining. If we have them, I don't know. Maybe we won't even have any debates this year because of coronavirus. Who knows? I'm sure we will. They'll do it somehow, but we'll see. All right, a couple of things to go over. Some of you have not turned in your topic yet for your history paper. The topic is the easiest assignment. All you got to do is go on the assignment, click on the link where you choose your topic. There's several different attachments. One of them is the list of topics. You pick the one you want, choose it, and go into the link that says, I can't remember what it says, but anyway. There's one that you click on that gives you the option of writing your name and the topic that you chose. Turn it in, and you're good to go. It's very simple. Some of you have not turned it in yet. At least, well, I checked yesterday, and some of you hadn't turned it in yet. So unless that has changed since yesterday. So please get that done. It was due last Friday. Your sources are due Monday. So you have a few days to choose sources. I can't remember if I went with 3 or 4 this time. I think I just went with 3, since you're stuck at home. All your sources either have to be books that you have at home or the internet. So I decided to cut down the amount of sources that I'm requiring this time. So I think I just have 3 sources required for your history paper this quarter, if I remember correctly. So get me your 3 sources by Monday, and again, it's the same thing. You go on the link, you write them in. Or actually, a better way to do it would be to put them on a Word document, save it to OneDrive. So you each have your own OneDrive, okay? Save it to OneDrive, and then when you turn in your assignment, you go to whatever link allows you to attach your work, right? And then you click on that and attach your Word document to your assignment. If you have trouble doing that, let me know. If you can't get it figured out, you can just print it out and send it in with your packet on Monday. But again, try to attach it to the assignment if at all possible. If you can't, just go ahead and print it out and send it to Monday. We good? All right. Make sure you click turn in on your assignments. I have my suspicions that some of you are still doing assignments and then forgetting to click turn in. Make sure you turn them in. Okay, make sure you check every class every day and make sure you're getting all your assignments done. All right? Good. All right, today's history class we're going to review because we have a cumulative test tomorrow. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly, so make sure you take out your notes, follow along. I'll ask the question, I'll have a short pause to give you a chance to find it and say it, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time, so just keep following along and make sure you get as much of this as you can. All right, so we're going to start at the end of the last lesson, which was about the what? What did we learn about in our last lesson? Spanish flu, the pandemic of 1918. So, what we learned. What did we learn from the Spanish flu? Pandemics are serious and must be dealt with seriously. Very good. We also learned that social distancing works. So what you're doing, guys, works. Keep it up. All right. How many deaths were a result of the Spanish flu in the United States alone? About 675,000. Worldwide, how many deaths? 20 to 50 million. What made the Spanish flu so bad? It was a deadly virus. The trench, it got into the soldiers, and trench warfare was a big thing in World War I, and it was a breeding ground for Spanish flu, right? So it spread through the troops because of that. Troop movement, troops moving around from one place to the next or going back home, caused the flu to spread to different places. There was a lack of social distancing because people weren't focused real hard on the Spanish flu and because the government was keeping it under wraps, right? Weren't telling people about it. So people weren't aware and they weren't social distancing like we are today. They probably actually did it just a little bit more naturally back then because people didn't travel as much. But yeah, people were not socially distancing as well as they should have, at least in certain places and at certain times. And one of the things that contributed to that was the Victory Day parades that happened when the war ended. Also, a lack of openness and honesty on the part of the governments. And one of the big ones was that they had a lack of medical knowledge and resources back then. They just did not have the kind of medical technology that we have today. The Spanish flu originated possibly where? Probably either in France or in Kansas or in China. Surprise, surprise. The first wave of the Spanish flu was in the spring of 1918. It had a low death rate. The second wave was in the fall of 1918. It was a virulent strain and it was much more deadly, and it killed who? The young, the old, and the middle-aged. Mostly. I mean, there was others too, but those were kind of the target. So the W curve, remember? When was the armistice signed for World War I? November 11, 1918. Germany was forced to agree to harsh terms. When did the U.S. enter the war? 1917. True or false? The U.S. made the war worse. False. They helped end it, right? Played a big part in turning the tide of the war and ending it more quickly. The U.S. lost about how many men in the war? 115,000. What is nationalism? Nationalism is the identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. This became prominent where before World War I? Europe. What else was growing in Europe? Imperialism. In other words, empire building, the desire to expand and grow your nation and become an empire. The U.S. remained what as long as they could? neutral. So the U.S., their foreign policy of getting involved in other people's affairs often led to the perception of being a bully. Okay? American imperialism. When was the Panama Canal completed? 1914. What were the characteristics of the Spanish-American War? It erupted over tension where? In Cuba, but battles were fought in many different places, and it liberated 3 countries in particular from Spain, and these countries were annexed, or at least partially annexed by the U.S. What were those countries? Cuba, Philippines, and Puerto Rico. Cuba was partially annexed. They now have their freedom. They're not under us anymore. The Philippines were annexed, and they grew resentful because we had promised them freedom, and then we didn't deliver on that promise, and we ended up oppressing them very badly. They are now free. And Puerto Rico is still actually a U.S. territory. So there were several territories added in the 1800s that helped with military outposts as well as with the economy. What were some of these territories? Give me the ones that are not states. Midway, Guam, Wake Island, Johnston Islands, American Samoa, and American Samoa is still part of us. I'm not sure about the others. These were naval outposts, okay? What were the 2 territories that were added? One was added in 1867, the other was added in 1900, and they are now states. Alaska and Hawaii. What is a policy or ideology of extending a country's rule over foreign nations? Imperialism. What is a policy or doctrine of isolating one's country from the affairs of other nations and interests? Isolationism. What were some of the problems that came out of the feminist movement? Undermining God's design for female roles. Failure to see the beauty of genuine Christ-honoring femininity. False accusations and stereotyping men. Sexual immorality, abortion, and transgenderism. What were some of the legit concerns that feminists had? They were concerned about violence against women, and they were concerned about the objectification of women. Fourth wave feminism. What are the dates that fourth wave feminism approximately began and lasted till? Started in about 2010 and is lasting through to the present. We're still in fourth wave feminism, right? What are some of the characteristics of fourth wave feminism? Hashtag #MeToo. And equality of outcome is a big deal for fourth wave feminists. They want women to be, on average, everywhere in the world, paid just as much as men, right? That's kind of a broad overview, oversimplification, but that's the basic understanding of what it is. Let's see. Third wave feminism started when and lasted till when? 1990s until the early 2000s. It was much the same as second wave, just more intense. They focused on diversity amongst, there was some diversity amongst the feminists at this point. There were some divisions, different things that they emphasized and focused. Disagreements among feminists. They were for sexual liberation and transgenderism. Second wave feminists started when and lasted till when? 1960s until the 1980s. Their emphasis was domestic violence, women in the workplace, and reproductive rights, which is just a fine-sounding synonym of abortion. First wave feminism lasted from when till when? 1830s to 1900s. Their focus was women's suffrage, which is what? Women wanted the right to vote. What is the leading provider of abortions in America? What organization? Planned Parenthood. Who was the Planned Parenthood president who advocated the use of abortion for eugenic purposes? Alan Guttmacher. Guttmacher. It's fun to say his name. Guttmacher. Who was the Planned Parenthood founder who advocated for the use of birth control to accomplish eugenic purposes? In other words, her goal was to exterminate blacks and other defective humans. So she wasn't necessarily for using abortion to do this, but she still wanted to do it using birth control. Her name was Margaret Sanger. Abortion has been promoted as a tool for what? Purifying the human race. When did support for the eugenics movement weaken? After World War II, and that was a lot because of the Holocaust, right? In America, thousands of Americans were forcibly what as a result of this eugenics movement? Sterilized. Who was the founder of the eugenics movement? He was a half-cousin of Charles Darwin, Francis Galton. The study of how to arrange reproduction with a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable is called eugenics. Full naturalistic evolution denies the existence of God. Jumping up a little farther, who is kind of the modern figurehead of, well, the founder of Darwinism? This is a hard one. Who is the founder of Darwinism? Charles Darwin. Good. Well done. He was born in 1809 in Shrewsbury, England. He was kind of at the right place at the right time. He did not invent evolution. He just popularized it by writing 2 books. What were they? The Origin of Species and The Descent of Man. Very provocative titles. Okay, let's see. Teddy Roosevelt. Let's talk about him. He had a tough foreign policy, which could be summed up in one sentence. Speak softly and carry a big stick. He won re-election in 1904. He died in 1919. His niece was Eleanor, who married his 5th cousin, Franklin, who became the 32nd president. And what famous mountain is Teddy Roosevelt's head carved on? Mount Rushmore. Teddy Roosevelt, what was he? What are a variety of different vocations that he had? He was or vocations and hobbies, things like that, things he did. He was a cowboy, he was a sheriff, he was a big game hunter, he was a war hero, he was governor of New York, and he became the president when who was assassinated? William McKinley. He was a conservative, progressive. Very good. Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Bear Roosevelt. All right, so progressivism. Let's talk about that. What were some of the reforms that were brought in by progressivism? You have labor reforms, which has regulations on monopolies, regulations on child labor, minimum wage, reduced hours, and workman's compensation. I was going to do my own tricks, but then I hurt myself and had to get workman's compensation. Conservationism was another reform. Feminism. Women's suffrage. Again, women wanting the right to vote. Moral reforms. Prohibition. Okay? Trying to outlaw alcohol. The dark side of these reforms were eugenics, abortion, racism, and overconfidence in the government. Who were people exposed to injustice and corruption? Muckrakers. What was the philosophy of the progressives? That society could be improved through social reform implemented by the government. And it was a reaction to what? Reaction to the issues created by the Industrial Revolution. Okay? So, talking about the Industrial Revolution, what were some of the bad things that came out of that? You have mass production replacing skilled tradesmen. It was very monotonous work, so it's kind of fun. It's hard to find meaning in your work when you're standing at the same place all day, doing the exact same thing every day, all day, 5 or 6 days a week, 8 to 12 hours a day. It's hard to find meaning. So you have monotonous work, right? Poor conditions, dangerous conditions, child labor, pollution, boom and bust, so the economy would take off, then it would crash, and it would take off. Corruption and strikes. Some of the things that happened during the Industrial Revolution, some of the things that we got. Henry Ford came up with the assembly line. This made vehicles affordable. We got division of labor. We had railroads and telegraphs, the transcontinental telegraph, the transatlantic telegraph. We had factories. We had the first department store in 1876. We had the first chain store in 1859. And in the 1870s, we had the first mail order catalogs. Sears was one of the first. I don't think it was the very first, but it was one of the first. Okay? Sears catalog. Some of the inventions in the 1800s were steel. In 1856, dynamite, typewriter, electric motor, telephone, cash register, adding machine, phonograph, light bulb, not photograph, phonograph, phonograph. When was the photograph? I'm not sure. Anyway, phonograph, light bulb, gasoline internal combustion engine, which of course led to cars, right? More efficient cars. Natural resources that we had that fueled the Industrial Revolution were what? Oil, which was refined into kerosene, iron, and coal. Coal. All right. Let's see, where are we at? Oh, Colorado. Colorado history. What are some features of Colorado? Some things that we are famous for. Denver claims to be the first place to make a cheeseburger, right? Or at least the first place where they actually named it a cheeseburger. Maybe not actually make it, named it that. I believe, I think I have that right. All right, we're famous for the Air Force Academy, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, which is just over there, up on the mountain. The state bird of Colorado is the lark bunting. The tree is the blue spruce, good job. The animal is the bighorn sheep, well done. And the flower is the columbine. In Colorado Springs, we have the headquarters for the Olympics, or for at least the National Olympic Headquarters, the United States Olympic Headquarters. All right, what are some violent things that took place in Colorado? Some violence that broke out at different times. You had the Ku Klux Klan was a stronghold in Colorado, right? You had labor disputes. So the Columbine Mine Massacre that happened. The Ludlow Massacre. 2 labor disputes that broke out because of strikes and things like that. And then you had in 1999 the Columbine school shooting, and I can't remember when it was, not too long ago, like 2017 or something, the Arvada theater shooting, which was not far away from this Columbine school shooting. Some of the things that contribute to Colorado's economy are what? Recreational marijuana, beer. We have a lot of beer produced in Colorado. Tourism, so things like skiing, mountain biking, hunting. People just coming out to camp, see the mountains and so forth. Climbing 14ers is a big thing. We didn't write that down, but anyway. Agriculture is big in Colorado. Mining is big in Colorado. Colorado became a state in 1876. That's why it's called the Centennial State. And we got women's suffrage. We allowed women, we were the first state to allow women to vote with a popular vote. So Wyoming actually did it before us, but they did it in a different way. We got it through a popular vote. They got it through, I can't remember, politics or whatever their politicians are called. I think we're the ones that put it together. Let's see. Let's move up a little bit farther. The Homestead Act was when? 1862. Homesteading meant you could get what? 160 acres for free if you settled it, claimed it, and farmed it and took care of it for, I think, 5 years, right? A lot of homesteaders lived in sod houses, which were made out of sod. Good job. Some of you got that on the quiz. Some were kind of like, what am I supposed to put? Like dirt or mud? Which I was pretty lenient, but anyway, sod houses were built out of sod. Okay. Some of the challenges that homesteaders had were harsh weather, storms, drought, winters, grasshoppers. Some of the innovations that came out of homesteading were windmills, better farming practices, new technology. So guys like John Deere and Cyrus McCormick brought some new inventions. In the West, we had cattlemen, people who raised cows, right? Raised cattle. This was started by Mexicans, and it was done typically on the open range. And when did the open range end? When barbed wire came out, right? There were cattle drives, cow towns. The cattlemen often clashed with sheep herders. There were range wars, and a lot of culture of the West came out of the whole culture of the cattlemen, right? Let's see, the railroad was completed where? Promontory Point, Utah. That's where the two organizations came together. The Union Pacific. Where did the Union Pacific start? Omaha, Nebraska. The Central Pacific started at Sacramento, California. They hired immigrants to work for them. The work was two adjectives: hard and dangerous. The results of the railroad were conflict with Indians, buffalo slaughter, and time zones. Pony Express was a financial failure. It ended when what came along? Telegraph. It was successful in that it was timely. It did actually do a good job of getting mail on time. But yeah, financially it was a disaster. What was the means of transportation in the West before trains? Stagecoach. Let's see, who were some gunfighters, lawmen, and outlaws? Famous gunfighters, lawmen, and outlaws. Wild Bill Hickok, Billy the Kid, Wyatt Earp, Butch Cassidy, Tom Horn, Doc Holliday, and Calamity Jane. Who were self-appointed crime fighters? Vigilantes. So vigilante justice is when you have self-appointed crime fighters. Some of the Okay guys, sorry, I think my camera cut out there for a second again. Hopefully the battery's not going dead. Anyway, I'm going to try to get this done. I'm going to go through this quickly. So, who was the president after Abraham Lincoln who continued Lincoln's plans? Andrew Johnson. He was impeached and almost removed from office. The sentence that characterizes Lincoln's plan: malice toward none with charity for all. Let's see. What was one of the greatest speeches in American history? It lasted less than 2 minutes, and it points back to the Founding Fathers and their ideals. The Gettysburg Address. Some key quotes: the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. That we were highly resolved, and that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. What was issued on September 22nd, 1862, after a partial victory at Antietam, went into effect January 1st, 1863. It was a fit and necessary war measure, and it ended slavery in the rebellious states. The Emancipation Proclamation. Even though it only actually freed some slaves, it was the death knell to slavery. Who assassinated Lincoln? John Wilkes Booth. How many people died in the Civil War? 620,000. What was some of the technology that came out of the Civil War? Better rifles, Gatling gun, expanding bullets, observation balloons, ironclad ships, submarines, telegraphy, railroads, mines, improved prosthetics, photographs. By all intents and purposes, it ended slavery. Okay? Which economy was devastated by the Civil War? The South. The North was fine. Who was the general who destroyed the Shenandoah Valley? Philip Sheridan. Who destroyed Atlanta and a 50-mile wide path to the sea? Sherman. When did Lee surrender at Appomattox? April 9th, 1865. Who was the commander-in-chief appointed by Lincoln who was aggressive and decisive and helped end the war? Ulysses S. Grant. What was the bloodiest battle of the war? Gettysburg. Let's see. What were some of the advantages of the Confederates? They were more trained and had more experience, more accustomed to outdoors, familiar with the land, more confidence, and they had a guy named Robert E. Lee. Advantages of the Union were more people, more resources, better transportation, more money, better navy, and a stable government. Who was the president of the Confederacy? Jefferson Davis. Where was the first battle? Fort Sumter. Let's back up. What was the primary thing that divided the North and the South? Slavery. What was the act that said runaway slaves could be apprehended in free states? The Fugitive Slave Act. What book increased anti-slavery fervor? Uncle Tom's Cabin. What set in motion the events that led to the Civil War? The election of President Lincoln in 1860. Where was gold found in California? At Sutter's Fort in Sacramento. When? 1848. The gold rush happened in 1849. That's why they're called the 49ers. Marked by lawlessness, racial tension, and boom towns. Move out farther. What are three famous, give me a couple of famous trails that pioneers followed to the west. Santa Fe, Oregon Trail, and the California Trail. Who were the two missionaries killed by the Cayuse Indians? Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. Who were some famous mountain men? James Beckworth, Jim Bridger, Jeremiah Johnson, John Coulter, Kit Carson. What was the belief that it was America's God-ordained destiny to stretch from sea to shining sea? Manifest destiny. What were the two famous battles that were fought in the Texas War for Independence? Alamo and Goliad. Western Indian removal started with what violent act? The Sand Creek Massacre, and it ended with what other violent act? The massacre at Wounded Knee. Eastern removal started with King Philip's War and ended with the Trail of Tears. The pattern of conquest with whites and Indians was whites move into native area, they clash, there are treaties, the treaties are broken, and then the whole cycle repeats itself. Treaties were constantly broken. Atrocities were committed by both sides. The superior man and firepower of the whites prevailed. What are some of the differences in the Indian way of life and the typical American way of life? Indians were wild and free, moved from place to place, lived in the present. They were generous, superstitious, not time conscious, and lived in harmony with nature. White men were settlers, private property. They loved their private property, planned for the future, saved money, practical, very time conscious, and they liked to conquer nature instead of live in harmony with it. Slavery. Slave life was, what are some characteristics? Little or no hope of ever attaining freedom. There was harsh penalties for trying to escape. They were bought and sold, and families were split up. That's kind of the worst case scenario. About what percent of slaves died on their way to America? About 50%. Who was the first Democratic president? He was elected in 1829, served from 1829 to 1837. He championed the common man. Andrew Jackson. What was the war where we battled Great Britain for the control of the Great Lakes? It ended with the Treaty of Ghent. It was famous for the Battle of New Orleans, which was actually fought after the war was over. That's where Andrew Jackson became famous. Gave the U.S. confidence and respect, and it promoted westward expansion. What war was that? The War of 1812. Who explored the Mississippi River? Followed the Arkansas to its source, and has Pikes Peak is named after him. Zebulon Pike. Good job. Who expanded knowledge of the West? Established friendly relations with the Indians. They explored the Louisiana Territory. They had this gal named Sacagawea, Sacagawea, however you want to say her name. They had her with them. Arguably, she's the one that made the whole thing successful, right? Who were those guys? Lewis and Clark. Who won the turbulent election of 1800? He was a Democrat Republican, and his most significant accomplishment was the Louisiana Purchase. Thomas Jefferson. Who were the two guys that had a duel? Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr. Who missed? Alexander Hamilton. That means he's the one that died. Who was our first president? George Washington. First vice president, John Adams. What were the first political parties? Democrat Republicans and the Federalists. Some government questions. What are the three branches of government? Legislative, executive, and judicial. So the legislative branch is made up of Congress, which has two parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Their responsibility is to make laws. The executive branch is made up of the President, Vice President, and his cabinet, and his job is to enforce the laws. The judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court, which is made up of 9 justices that are appointed by the President, and they serve a lifetime term. Okay, Amendment 2 of the Constitution gives us the right to keep and bear arms. Amendment 1 to the Constitution says that Congress cannot pass a law restricting the establishment or practice of any religions. So religious freedom. Okay? What power does the President have? He's the Commander-in-Chief of the Army. He nominates Supreme Court justices and ambassadors. He can veto laws. He can give pardons. Yes. The judicial branch decides the constitutionality of laws, right? And the legislative branch, again, makes laws, declares war, and raises armies to provide a navy. How many years does a senator's term last for? How long does a senator, how long is their term? 6 years, okay? How many senators does each state get? 2. Every state gets 2 senators, okay? How long is the term of a House of Representatives person? 2 years, okay? 2 years. What were some of the conflicts that came about when our founding fathers were putting together the Constitution? Large states versus small states, right? Slavery and trade. What were the solutions to these conflicts? They put together the Senate and the House of Representatives to take care of the large state versus small state dilemma. For slavery, they came up with a 3/5 compromise. They counted black people as 3/5 of a person. And Congress was given power to tax imports but not exports. What effectively persuaded many states to sign the Constitution? The Federalist Papers. What were the reasons for the Constitution? To form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, our children and our children's children. In the Revolutionary War, what were the advantages of the Americans? They cared for and were fervently committed to the cause. At least some of them were. They were familiar with the land, they had competent leadership, and they were supported by other countries who admired their cause. What qualities set General Washington apart? He believed in what he was fighting for, and he was honest about the challenges that he faced. When was the Second Continental Congress that declared independence? 1776. It was also the date of Washington's key victory at Trenton. When did the British surrender at Yorktown? 1781, but there wasn't actually a treaty signed until September 3rd of 1783, which is the official end of the war. In the Declaration of Independence, we have some very important statements. Paragraph 4 says, "And for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." Paragraph 2 says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration was mainly written by Thomas Jefferson, who wrote Common Sense, which played a critical role in convincing colonists to give up on reconciliation and go for all-out independence. Thomas Paine wrote that. Okay, the French and Indian War happened because French and English claims began to overlap. The French resisted the English fur trade, and the French and English already had conflict in Europe. What is history? A record of what happened. And why is it important to learn history? If we don't learn from the past, we're bound to repeat the mistakes. It tells us who we are, and it helps us understand why we do what we do. All right, guys, I'm not guaranteeing I covered absolutely everything that will be on the test, but that's the gist of it. Study your notes. Make sure you know this stuff. Adios.